Okay, I'm Usman Haque. I'm the founding partner of Umbrellium. I'm trained as an architect and I work on participatory systems, especially working in the urban context. So there is a principle from the Cold War called mutually assured destruction, which was basically a strategy that assured that different sides don't attack each other because their futures are bound together. Now I'm interested in kind of repurposing that, going beyond that principle and figuring out how to do mutually assured construction, which is not just about us not destroying each other, but actually about us being constructive together, even when it's difficult to collaborate, when it's when it seems impossible because we don't agree on things yet, we don't have the same shared vision, we don't even have consensus. So it is actually possible to take some of those frictions and harness those frictions, structure it in such a way that that actually does lead to some kind of ongoing collaboration, even without consensus. There was an old idea of community participatory design, which I think was around this idea that we can all sit around a table and together we will design something. And there was one design that would come out of that process, and we basically had to agree to it or not. Crowdsourcing is a bit of an evolution of that, where you get lots of people involved in choosing or deciding on a possible future, which still has the supposition that there is one future that you choose or that you optimize for. What I'm looking to do is to figure out how to take the messiness of our disagreements and still have them coexist next to each other so that we don't all have to agree on a specific thing. It's not about us sort of turning over to a group of people to find the optimal solution. Instead, it's about designing sort of at a very hyper-local level what decisions that I make and just understanding really how those impact my neighbor or the person next to me or the decisions that they have to make. We don't necessarily need to agree on something, but we do need to be able to negotiate on how our decisions impact each other. When I'm working, it's not exactly like I have 3 steps, but there's 3 elements that seem to feature in the kinds of projects that we do. And when you're dealing with, basically the messy everyday reality of people with lots of different opinions and desires and aspirations and goals, the 3 things that I've found good to try and concentrate on is, first of all, figuring out how people can just work together without agreeing on something. Is there something you can get people doing together before getting to any consensus, and even without having a shared vision of where this is going? The second part of this, and it's not really a step, but it's just another component, is deciding together. And this is where you actually get people making a decision together, negotiating around it, and actually they have to negotiate. They have to go through the hard conversation around that to make a decision about the future. And what you're looking to do there is partly, of course, encourage that kind of cooperation or the conversation, but more importantly, it's about binding together responsibility for that future. And then the third aspect is this one of kind of actually having a sense of accomplishment together, acting together, actually changing something together. Again, we might not agree on exactly what it should be, and we might be accomplishing different things, but the fact that we do it at the same time in the same context is important. And so in some way, kind of binding together, working, deciding, and acting together, this for me sort of comes together in this kind of idea of mutually assured construction. Heinz von Förster wrote a paper called On Constructing a Reality. And one of the things that he got to at the end was essentially a kind of an ethical imperative, which was to always act so as to increase the number of possibilities or increase the number of choices. And I find this very interesting in the context of design, thinking about not how to narrow down or optimize or converge on a single solution, but instead to constantly open up the set of possibilities. And it's a bit of a change of a mindset, and it's a bit difficult, but the idea really is that you're trying to figure out, if I make this decision now as the designer of this system, how can I ensure that that decision can be reevaluated, repurposed, or rescripted by others at the next stage. I have to make some decision because I am in some way pulling together this thing, or maybe me plus a group of people, if you like. But how can we ensure that that doesn't become a solid decision that never changes, if you see what I mean? So what that means is that when we're actually trying to work with groups of people, not just are we talking about what is the final outcome, what do we finally achieve, this vision, but actually what is even the goal of that vision? What's the purpose? Like, let's constantly, at every stage that we go through, reevaluate and reassess all the decisions that were made about the very goal, as well as the outcome of the whole thing. So in the voiceover project, we were exploring, I think, quite a few of these themes. This was a project in East Durham, up in the north of England, which was former coal mining territory. And we were working with the local community basically to create what ended up being a radically transparent public communication infrastructure. We didn't know what it was going to be at the beginning, but this is what kind of emerged over many workshops and events and discussions. And the idea of this was that rather than trying to make communication ultra private, which I think a lot of people are trying to work on, we were trying to look at the opposite. What happens if, when we speak, it actually does get broadcast to others, that we can have these conversations that get broadcast to others, where not only is our conversation public and something that others can engage in, but you can even see in the infrastructure through these kind of light pulses going down the street, the actual transaction, the actual kind of movement of that sound going from one house to the other, connecting up two different locations. Now, as I said, it took us a couple of years to get to that as the final manifestation. The real point of the project was working with the local community, trying to figure out, how do we do this? Why do we do it? What is the infrastructure used for? Is it for political speeches? Is it for bedtime stories? Is it for jokes? Is it for performance? Is it for conversations? Is it for poetry? It ended up being all of these things and many more. But really, that was the kind of point of the project, not the technical infrastructure that was installed, but all the relationships that were formed in people deciding to come together somehow to connect with their neighbors and transport part of the communication that went up and down their roads and through their houses. What's my story? No. I'm rewriting it every morning.